Hi guys, it's Tony Robbins. You're listening to Habits and Hustle. Crush it.
Today on Habits and Hustle, we have Dr. Naidoo, who is the author of the best-selling book, This Is Your Brain on Food. She is literally the world's first triple threat in the food and medicine space. A Harvard-trained psychiatrist, a professional chef graduating with her culinary school's most coveted award, and a trained nutrition specialist. She really has it all. She has been considered Harvard's mood food expert and has been featured in a ton of media, including the Wall Street Journal, Goop, Healthline, NBC, and the list goes on. Please listen to this episode in its entirety and learn about how food affects your brain and everything else in between. I loved this episode. Enjoy. It's really great to meet you. I'm a huge fan of yours.
Thank you.
You're like Superwoman. Your credentials are like unbelievable. I've never met anyone who has you're like a triple threat. You have like everything, and usually you have guests on who have one of those modalities, and you would literally have all of it. So,
thank you.
No, you're welcome. You're a Harvard psychiatrist, actual professional chef as well.
Yeah. Yes.
And nutritional specialist. I mean, wow, you're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I love your work, and I love your setup. It's cool.
Oh, thank you. You know what it is? I'll tell you what this is. Normally we do the podcast on treadmills.
Oh, wow. Okay. That looks so cool put together like that.
I know. People keep on asking me if it's from the Game of Thrones or something because it looks so crazy.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So no, it's just basically I have nowhere else to do this. I have 2 kids on Zoom, and since everything now is this way on virtual or Zoom Squadcast, I have to kind of put my new office, so to speak, right in front of my old office.
It's all of this squashed up space that we're in, but trying to make it work.
Absolutely. Where do you live, by the way?
I'm currently in New York, but I live between Boston and New York, but I'm based in New York mostly these days.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so because at the beginning, we'll do a proper intro, of course, but I get right into it with people because, I get so excited when you just come on, and especially you, who I feel is just, like I said, like such a role model. I mean, are you, first of all, if you call yourself, you're a nutritional psychiatrist. Now, Are you the first, or did you create that segment, or are you just the only one who does this?
So I think there's probably one other recognized person in the US, my colleague Drew Ramsey, who's done it in sort of a private practice model. I think that what I did was that I brought it into mainstream academia. So, my mentors at Mass General and at Harvard were testing omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, magnesium, folate, for decades. But really what nutritional psychiatry does is puts it together for people into a nutritional plan and integrates, in my book, what I felt was necessary. So 2 things. In my book, what I felt was important was bringing together what we know. Nutrition science does change all the time. So that people could be guided to use food and nutrition as a tool. But the other component, besides the fact that hadn't been done in that way before, was that beginning the clinic at Mass General was significant because it really was getting the idea into academia. And having them recognize that, this is worth building a clinic on. I think the book has brought a lot more visibility to the clinic, but I think that there's a real hunger that people have to find more ways to feel better, because we know that medications just only take us, and research has panned out that medications only take us so far, including therapies, of which I'm a big believer. So.
Which is amazing, because typically you think of a psychiatrist as someone who just prescribes meds, right? Like that's
the way it's turned out to be. It never used to be that way when Freud and the analysts were around, but that's how modern day medicine has made it, and insurance certainly has made it that way. But I think that the more times we can involve a holistic approach that has the mind-body connection and And really, mindfulness becomes really important to all aspects of mental well-being.
Well, yeah, because you can't make money off of food, so to speak, right? So they would be pushing all the drugs. Now, what's interesting to me is that so you've actually helped heal people. You're really about the mind gut connection and how the mood is affected by that. And can we first start with the vagus nerve? What is the vagus nerve for people who don't know?
Sure. So the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, and it connects the brain to the gut. It's this actual nerve, and what I like to call it is a two-way superhighway, because it's bidirectional flow of chemical messages from the gut to the brain and the brain to the gut. It's significant because it works all the time, and it really helps people understand that there's this real connection. But then people also need to understand that the gut and brain arise from the exact same cells in the embryo, the neural crest cells. So, people don't initially think, oh, these two organs are connected. My brain's up here and my gut's down here. But they actually start from the same cells. Then we also, for times of the pandemic, really want to be mindful of the fact that about 70% of our immune system is in the gut as well. It's all a system. It's just, it's all a system that modern medicine tends to make very siloed.
Absolutely. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to add that I also read recently or heard on a podcast, maybe it was with you, about how mental health is basically like one of the biggest drivers for life loss or disability, more so than even heart disease. Yes. And now I imagine with the pandemic and everybody feeling more isolated, the depression is up, anxiety is up. Everything
is up. And the CDC reported that 11% of Americans considered suicide during the pandemic, which as a psychiatrist is a very frightening number. And it speaks to the depth of despair that people are feeling and maybe unable to share. And in my opinion, clinically, I think that the silent pandemic is the mental health crisis, because we're talking about the vaccine, we're talking about how to be safe for COVID, but no one's talking about how people are managing with isolation, being separated from families, or even those with their families. There's different levels of stress, financial stress, school stress, meal stress, that they're experiencing on so many levels. We know from surveys that different types of abuse has increased during the pandemic because of confinement and people really being in quarantine with people who are abusive. And then drugs and alcohol are on the increase because there's boredom, there's suffering, there's, again, quarantine and inability to go out and see friends. So many people are just sort of, just drinking more. And I've evaluated patients where, people are talking about having most of a bottle of wine at dinner. And ordinarily, that would be maybe a Saturday evening for someone, but now this is a nightly occurrence with people. And because of this almost lack of boundaries that the days in the pandemic has, people don't know whether it's Wednesday or Sunday. Sometimes it's every day that they're having a bottle or two of wine, and it takes a while to help understand that. So, I'm not judging them. I just think it's really hard for people right now.
Oh, absolutely. Now, would you say that, like, in your practice, do you combine, like, you're not saying, or maybe you are, I don't know, but that, foods, because obviously the book is called This Is Your Brain on Food, that you can replace medication with food, or the combination together is what really is the secret sauce?
It's either the combination. So I still prescribe medications for some individuals. But what nutritional psychiatry does is it's really an augmentation, it's an additional strategy for someone who's taking a medication. So I've had individuals use nutritional strategies and be able to lower the doses of medications they take. I've also had individuals who, because we know that DSM-5 just does not capture every single person who has, let's say, some type of mental distress. The categories just don't capture everyone. And there are many people with a touch of anxiety, but also, some problems with focus. And there are many, many cases like that. And I find that those individuals, if they're otherwise functioning and they have the willingness, the ability, but really the energy to say, well, I'm going to try this plan, they can actually get around taking medications and be perfectly fine over time. But it involves being consistent, not expecting overnight success, and being safe enough to manage without a medication. And there are those who are too severely depressed who really do need to start with a medication and work their way from there. The amazing thing, though, is even if someone's being prescribed a new antidepressant, doesn't mean they can't eat differently. If they're taught, in fact, if they're educated ahead of time about how to use these strategies to, help the fiber in your gut, to eat, plant-rich polyphenols, to eat omega-3 rich fatty fish like salmon, then they have the tools going into that versus just facing the side effects, which is usually how medications work. You go from diagnosis to medication and then the side effects. Right. And hopefully in that there's some relief of the symptoms.
And so you kind of, from your book, I read all about the fact that you kind of got into this whole this blend of nutrition and psychiatry because of your own health and your own experience. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit and how it kind of evolved and came to be?
Absolutely. You never intend to be your own patient or to be your own case study, and somehow life teaches you great lessons. And so Absolutely. I was pretty healthy, not noticing any changes. Probably I would, and I have said this before, I think that my stress level, I was growing my clinic and really interested in the work I was doing, but I was busy. And I think the one thing that had changed is my levels of stress. And unfortunately, by chance, while on vacation, discovered this lump. And, the blessing of being or having access to excellent medical care is that things move so fast. So it's almost as though my body went through all of these tests in a super fast way. But my mind was still in shock. And so within, 7 days, including a weekend, I was beginning treatment. And I think that what occurred to me in the morning of my treatment was I'm fortunately not a person who has anxiety. Like I don't, I empathize with people who do, but I hadn't been a person who would wake up feeling anxious. But that morning of my first treatment, I was incredibly unhinged and feeling, what was I? And here's the problem. I knew all the side effects I was going to face, and that was the scariest part for me. And it really was a very seminal moment in how things changed for me, and I think made me realize that I was advising people and counseling people and studying this and researching it. And, why wasn't I just trying it on myself? Because I was sort of thinking about the side effects of the medications and not what can I do to improve how I'm feeling, because I was unusually anxious. And that's really when I decided in that moment right there. And that became the attitude of how I was going to handle treatment. I was going to do everything I knew and up my game in terms of how I was eating, what I was drinking, how I was managing myself in order to feel better. And I have to say that I didn't know it would result in that, but my doctors were always stunned that, I had virtually no side effects. I went through, wow. I went through treatment with obviously the things that you can't avoid, the chemotherapy and the effects of chemotherapy. But so for example, I'm saying there's no way around the hair loss, but that part is hard. But to not have the side effects that people suffer with was quite amazing, and that to me was a feat. And it taught me the power of how you eat, of really putting it into practice, and looking to see how your body would respond. So I really inadvertently became my own case study, but it was, I think it was good. It was good in the end. It taught me so much, and it humbled me, because you always, it's so powerful to have a prescription pad, and to write prescriptions and someone leaves your office. In my early career, that was what we were trained to do. But I always had this side of myself that had been raised in a very holistic, in a family that was holistic, that had doctors and Ayurvedic practitioners, and that talked about the mind-body connection, that focused on eating healthy and eating delicious food. So for me, there was that gap of how do we bring it together for people, and hopefully we're getting closer to more of a holistic, integrated, and functional model of care that doesn't, just use the power of a prescription pad, and makes the person receiving the prescription actually not feel that they're in control.
Right.
It's really, it takes away a lot of autonomy. And of course, prescriptions are needed in many cases and can be life-saving. But sometimes it's good to know both sides of that. And I think when you're a patient, you realize.
Absolutely.
So it was very humbling.
I can imagine. I have so many questions written down here about all the different types of mental, I wouldn't call it an illness, but like just things that happen, mood disorders, they would call it, right? Like anxiety, depression, brain fog, even, which is not even, or like cognitive functioning. I want to know from now, I feel like everything becomes a fad, right? Like, intermittent fasting is a big thing. The keto is a big thing. It's all kind of it's kind of repackaged from like, isn't the keto similar to the Atkins diet back when, right? Like, it's so confusing and overwhelming. So what I notice a lot is people are doing a little bit of everything. So they're combining everything and getting no real effect, right? Because what would you say? Well, we'll start with the overarching and then we can kind of like whittle it down. What do you think of the intermittent fasting, the ketogenic? Like what do you think is the best, most effective diet plan for overall health?
Absolutely. So let me just start by saying that I think more and more that we understand the gut microbiome, we know that it's like a thumbprint for each of us. So I treated a woman several months ago who happened to come in with her adult daughter. They were talking, and I was taking the history, and they had an opposite reaction to the same healthy food. So we can't even assume that a healthy food is going to just be great for someone. That also speaks to the personalization of what we need to be doing in the field of nutritional psychiatry. That being said, based on the research and based on what we know, there are certain patterns which have definitely emerged. Plant-rich diets, fiber-filled diets, plants are rich in polyphenols, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory foods. And then things like beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, healthy whole grains, all really bring fiber as well as plant-based omega-3s to the gut. But we also need protein and we need healthy fats. So, proteins of choice, things like salmon. It could be a type of meat that you eat. It could be poultry. For me, it's much more the source of the food than whether someone should be vegetarian, vegan, or carnivore. So I consider myself diet agnostic, and what I eat really doesn't matter because I've got to be able to help the person who's carnivore or vegan or everyone in between. And what I've found is that people who find the balance for themselves of foods they enjoy eating, that they tolerate, but with those elements of paying attention, 1 in 10 Americans eat enough vegetables in their diet. That's a pretty low number. It's pretty sad. And most of us, eat way below the amount of fiber in our diet. And fiber is not, the orange supplement that our grannies take. It's, it's actually in our food. It's supposed to be something that we eat. And we now know that it's so important to nurture the gut microbiome. So I agree with you. There are, my patients always coming in with the newest fad or what they read in a magazine or the newspaper. I think that where I'm at in this process is I think that we need to be paying attention to a few things because of our metabolic health. And we know that the pandemic has shown that individuals with pre-existing conditions are ones who are suffering either from death or, in fact, severe side effects or longer-term problems. And what is the basis of some of that? It's how we're eating because it's metabolic disease. And with people, with levels of obesity being so high, with people being, I think, pre-diabetic or almost or many having type 2 diabetes. Metabolic health, which is really what we need to watch for, is insulin resistance, oxidative stress, and inflammation are the things that you want to break that cycle. So my ultimate answer is to be quite careful about a metabolic health. And what does that mean? Be careful about the types of carbohydrates you eat. You don't have to exclude them. They're a very important macronutrient. But be careful about the types, especially if you're struggling a little bit with your weight. Combine that with healthy fats from the right sources. You can eat plant-based protein. You can eat animal protein. The source matters. And a diet that's really rich and abundant in plants, and so fruit, vegetables, and plant-based proteins as well. So that kind of balance, it's not a keto diet and it's not the pure Mediterranean diet. It's almost some sort of combination of elements of being careful about carbohydrates, because there's nutritional ketosis, which is really allowing your body to still have carbohydrates, but the right kinds for your body, and allowing your body to burn alternate sources of fat. And I think that that's very, very different from the way that the ketogenic diet is discussed in the media or how people understand it. And that's what I mean about combining a plant-rich diet, being careful about carbohydrates, eating healthy fats, and then deciding on the proteins you want. Someone could be vegan and be eating diet soda and chips. That technically could be vegan.
Yeah.
In a similar way, someone who's carnivore could also be eating in an unhealthy way. So I think it's about finding what that right mix is, finding what your body tolerates based on your unique gut microbiome, and really not following one rule, but integrating elements of what works in different. We know, for example, that the Mediterranean diet really has hit the high notes in studies of depression and anxiety. So it's a good basis to have. It's a good starting point to have for us.
Yeah, I know. You did talk about the Mediterranean diet. Like, it sounded to me that was the diet that you would say would be the best one to look at as a role model, so to speak, to kind of base your diet on.
Absolutely.
Because of all the things that it kind of includes and involves. So then let's go through a bunch of stuff. So what is for brain fog, cognitive functioning, things like that? What would you say would be the best foods to help with that for focus? I mean, we all read about blueberries and wild salmon. Is there anything that we haven't heard of that's like, oh my God, that's completely unique, I'm going to include that?
Yeah, so some of my research showed that there's a very powerful antioxidant called luteolin that's found in things like fresh peppermint leaves, certain spices like thyme, juniper berries, and several others that actually help with brain fog. So adding those to a soup, adding those to a tea, actually can help to lift brain fog. With cognition, there are a list of foods, and the way that I divide up my book is into these chapters, but you can kind of read the chapter that's most appealing to you. And there's a list at the end of foods to embrace, which is really intended to be much longer than the foods you have to avoid. So with cognition, things, spices like turmeric, the pinch of black pepper to make it more bioactive, actually has been shown in a number of studies to help. But then you go into individual foods. So there are things like that are slightly unusual, like saffron, a spice that we don't use much of, actually shows a lot of good evidence for improving depression. But that's one of those circumstances where we don't eat enough saffron in our diet. When we do cook with it, we only use a few strands. It's also super expensive. Would be a place that someone could use a supplement that has saffron. So wait,
not to interrupt you, but I want to ask you two questions. So why do you have? So is turmeric not effective if you don't include the black pepper in it for the bioactivity?
Right. So turmeric has an active ingredient called curcumin, and curcumin becomes bioactive and more available to the body when it's either combined with black pepper, which contains a substance called piperine, or if you use it in a healthy fat. So either of those processes makes the turmeric really, my feeling is, why not get the best benefit and have it be bioavailable? If not you're really
Right.
not getting as much of a benefit from it. So I just tell people to add in their black pepper with their turmeric. It's a pinch of black pepper with turmeric. So you can grind some into your spice jar, or just remember to add it in when you're cooking.
So is there a difference between the ground turmeric and actually fresh turmeric that you have to kind of grind yourself in a juicer? Is there efficacy different?
So, generally the dried spice is much more potent than the fresh fruit. So, what I say to people is, because turmeric is a beautiful spice, but it's also bright orange. It stains people's clothing. It certainly stains chef's coats and counters. But it's up to them. They can really spend that money on a really good organic brand, and use the dry spice. But if they want to use the root, putting it into a blender or however they'd like to use it, or grate it on a fine grater or cut it up, could be okay too. But remembering that it does stain. It does stain.
I had no idea that. So what I've been doing, because I just assumed that the fresh root would be so much more potent, that I've been like basically staining. My husband's like so mad at me because I've stained all the counters, all my clothes. My hands are orange for like weeks on weeks on end.
I totally get it.
And I'm like, and he's always like, can't you just use the dry? And I'm like, no, this is way better. And now you're telling me it doesn't matter.
Well, it just had all dried spices concentrate. So even if you were to buy, say, fresh parsley, but you had, dried parsley for a roast, you would just use, or soup, you would use less of it, or thyme for that matter. That's just the understanding of how spices are. There's no harm in using the fresh root, but I caution people about it for exactly the reason that because then they get put off and they don't want to use it again because it stains a white shirt or.
Yep. It's 100% true. And then how about in terms of the amount? So I've read a bunch of stuff that in order for these spices like a turmeric or saffron or whatever, saffron, to actually be effective, you would have to use so much of it, because the amount that we're using, a teaspoon here, a teaspoon there, I know it's probably cumulative over time, but how much do you really actually need for these things to take effect for your brain fog, cognitive function, anxiety?
Sure. So with saffron, that is really for the best benefits for depression. A supplement is better, and that's because we just simply don't cook with enough strands of saffron to make a difference. And they used highly concentrate capsules in a lot of the studies. With turmeric, you can start off with a quarter teaspoon and a pinch of black pepper and build your way up from there. It's pretty safe in terms of, say, a number of teaspoons, depending on what you're making. And it does work over time, so it does accumulate. But the range that I like to give people is start with a quarter teaspoon and go to a few teaspoons in a day, and split it up into a soup or a smoothie or a tea, or cook with it in your stir fry, your saute, or your roasted vegetables. I think that it's pretty safe if you're eating it and you're including it. It's when people do strange things. There was a case report of someone who died because it was used intravenously, which that should never happen. So there's a good range of amounts you can use, and for things like cognition, just adding it into a soup every day or smoothie is just the way to go. And you don't need a ton. Start off with a quarter teaspoon and build your way up from there.
So how long does it take to kind of feel any type of real effect? How long, like all these things I'm going to be asking you, is it like after a few months, your body will start to see a change after a couple of weeks? Like what would it?
Right. So I think that with turmeric, it really probably is 1 to 2 months before you notice anything different. But here's the thing, turmeric has other effects. It is an anti-inflammatory, it is an antioxidant, it actually even has antiviral properties. So you're doing something good for your body if you're tolerating it and if you're not running into an issue with it. So my feeling with food, and actually even the other nutrients or spices that we're speaking about, is why not? Unless you have a problem, have an allergy or intolerance, add them in, because they all are going to build up towards your better health. Same thing with even changing a simple habit like the servings of vegetables that you're eating.
So then can we talk about anxiety? Because I feel like, as you know, we were speaking earlier, especially with the pandemic, I feel like that is at an all-time high as well.
Of course.
I read in your book certain things like vegetable oils to stay away from, artificial sweeteners.
Sweetness.
Would stevia be considered an okay sweetener, or is that still under artificial?
So stevia is natural. It was just found that in a lot of studies, it did worsen anxiety. So anxiety is a specific condition where you probably want to be a little bit careful with stevia. I think that erythritol, stevia are relatively okay. Some people are no artificial sweetness at all. I think that most people want that taste. So I say to them, if they really want to use something, just use everything in moderation. Just use a little bit. And there's a newer one on the market called allulose that is so far showing up some pretty good results. And I think that what people like about it is it actually looks like sugar. And so they can add it to baking, they can add it to a little bit of yogurt if they want and get that sweet taste. So far, the evidence that we're seeing in allulose is pretty good. But again, some people say no artificial sweeteners at all. My focus is really that niche of mental health. So therefore, even though stevia is, otherwise natural, it does worsen anxiety. So just be a little bit careful in that situation. I also like people to be aware of those foods to avoid because they're actually a pretty important category. Someone that I was treating, felt she was addicted to sugar, and in many ways she was. And so she gave up sugar and went from sodas to diet soda. And it really she had a real uptick in anxiety for two reasons. Firstly, her body was physically withdrawing from all of that sugar. And the second was she was going to sweetness. So that was driving her, artificial sweetness in the diet soda. So that just was kind of an event that was really not good for her, either physically or emotionally. So it's being aware of those things. So the fact that, processed meats contain nitrates. So those can drive depression. It's these little things just to be aware of. For processed vegetable oils, which are less expensive, right? So often fast food restaurants use them. So if your diet is, sort of largely fast foods, there are few things besides the processing, ultra-processing, the use of the inflammatory, pro-inflammatory processed vegetable oils. The things like, that people don't realize, like fast food French fries have sugar to make them hyperpalatable. And there's a recent study from February of 2021, so last month, that was from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, that was really looking at the likeness of the way that foods are processed are really made to be addictive because they are hyperpalatable and they have these processed ingredients. So it's these are the things that we do have to keep an eye out for.
Oh, absolutely. I know. I saw you talk about that one on somebody else's podcast about sugar and French fries. And, people aren't aware. They don't know what they don't know, right? So they think they're like having a no sugar diet and they're going to McDonald's and having French fries. And it's also dipped in gluten, which is a whole other funny thing, right? So it's just, so even gluten, though, you say is also, the correlation between gluten and anxiety is very, very high.
Exactly. So with gluten, I am careful about how I share this, and it goes back to what we spoke about earlier, because of the sort of fads that people go on, and there's these assumptions that if it's vegan, vegetarian, or even sometimes gluten-free, that it's healthy. But actually, a gluten-free packaged or processed food can have a ton of the wrong kinds of starches for you. So it may not have wheat, which is gluten is a protein in wheat, but it could have tons of other high starch and high glycemic processed flours. So the way I like to speak about gluten is really that it depends on what you tolerate. With people with anxiety, maybe a slow elimination or removing, say a person who eats just a ton of store-bought breads. That's something to think about. And sometimes a slow elimination will show that then anxiety improves. But that doesn't mean you have to demonize gluten, because there are also other sources that you can eat and are more whole food based sources. The ones that I'm always most concerned about are, the kind of loaf of sliced bread that you buy, that if you left on vacation and came back, it would be completely fine. And you have to ask yourself, why is it completely fine? Because it's filled with preservatives and added refined sugars and oils and stuff that unstabilizes and all of that keep it that way, right? That preserve it. And those are the things that are not great for our brain. So, and our metabolic health.
And our metabolic health. So what is it about gluten though that causes such anxiety? Like, what is it like? And I used to be told, if you were because I want to just kind of preface it with, I feel like a lot of times people cut out gluten because they think it's going to be, it'll help them with weight loss or fat loss. And I would always say, well, unless you have celiac disease, you're able to eat it. But they'll say, oh no, I'm gluten intolerant. They can't eat it.
Right.
And it's an overused thing. People just keep on saying they're intolerant just because they want to use it as a reason to lose weight.
To lose weight. It gets very confusing with the diet wars out there. And I think that, gluten is not the perfect substance. And part of that has to do with the industrialization of wheat over time. Right. And the kind of wheat that goes into the products that we, that are made. It goes back to the form of gluten that it is. And so I think that people do need to be careful because gluten can be destructive to the gut in certain ways, etc. But again, it goes back to the source. The other thing I would say about it is people often have a misunderstanding that if they start to eat products that are gluten-free, but then they go into the store and buy a ton of packaged processed foods that are gluten-free, and that doesn't help them. So there's that factor. And the way in which, when people give up gluten, you often will lose, just because of how the body and the metabolism works, you might actually initially lose weight. But people don't always think it's real weight loss because there's a lot of water weight that's lost. And then you still have to work on the shedding the pounds that you have. Right. So it's a little bit misleading to people sometimes. And that's why just cutting back, eating more vegetables that are pretty low in calorie and having, more fiber in your diet from beans and nuts and seeds and legumes and that type of thing. Just a healthier direction for you to go. Even eating a super healthy green salad with lots of colors from colors of the rainbow, that's a filling meal that could have the different nutrients you need. And it's just much better than going in direction of I have to be gluten free. That's actually over time going to help you shed the weight, but also keep it off.
Right, long term.
Yeah.
What would you say would be the best foods for someone who has anxiety to really incorporate into their diet?
So we covered one of them, which is a little bit of turmeric, but not everyone
turmeric, right?
Eats turmeric.
It seems like turmeric is like the superpower food, the superpower spice. It's good for everything. It's good for depression. It does.
Exactly. It does show up a lot in the different studies. But the other one is vitamin D rich foods. So having adding those in, and then there are things like there are in Ayurvedic medicine there are things like ashwagandha that people don't usually eat it, but it can be in different supplements that they find. There's also super dark chocolate. So dark chocolate, extra dark, about more than 80% with no added sugars, is actually a really good one because it is, firstly, it's a prebiotic food because of the way that it's a probiotic food because of the way that it's made, and contains serotonin, rich in magnesium, and all of those things will help with anxiety. So just a square of extra dark chocolate will be helpful to a lot of people. And, then things like eating your berries is my other tip, because the blueberries really do help with both the fiber, the polyphenols, which are great for your gut, great for your brain, antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. And then there are a few more that you work through, and including things like teas that are very relaxing, lavender, passion flower, which can be made into a tea, as well as chamomile. Are really helpful for things like stress and anxiety.
Wow. So then, wow, this is great. So then how about with kids? Let's talk about kids. Is the mental health in children, is it also obviously in an uptick now with all the Zooms and people are so isolated? Are we seeing more ADD in kids? Do you believe in ADD? Do you think that's an actual thing? I know a lot of
Yes.
doctors think it's kind of just an overused.
I think there's a little bit of both. I think it's over-diagnosed. I think we need to be careful before we pull that prescription pad out, especially in children. But I do see a lot of it. And I have to think that it's also related to our food system over time, and the more processed foods that children are eating, over the more high fructose corn syrup, the more unhealthy that our diet has become over generations. Which lines up with the obesity crisis in children as well. So
how do we help our kids? What are some good tips that we can do to feed our kids? Because kids also won't eat something if it's not, if it doesn't taste good. So
right, absolutely, and I think anything we eat has to taste good. If not, no one's going to stick to that healthier choice.
Exactly. So do you have any good tips for us that we can kind of use for those who have kids like me?
Sure. I think part of it is we have to model the behavior, right? So if you and I are going for that tub of ice cream after dinner, then that's what they see. Right. But there are ways to rework this for ourselves. And some of it is replacing those crunchy, salty snacks that they're looking for with healthy versions that you can quickly make. One of my favorite go-tos is either a chickpea snack or spinach or kale chips in the oven instead of, crunchy, salty snacks that are processed. Because literally it takes 20 minutes. You add on salt, pepper, and maybe a spice that you like. Right. A drizzle of avocado oil takes 20 minutes and it's a crunchy snack. Things like switching out the ice cream for I make a banana and ice cream, and it's really just frozen bananas. I will, in my recipes, use a touch of honey, but again, in moderation.
I was going to say, these recipes are very good, actually. I'm going to use one tonight, the miso glazed salmon.
Salmon, no, sweet potatoes, absolutely. And so it's almost like taking what they like and finding healthier versions and making sure that they're there. Another one that I like is having tons of cut veggies, in either interesting shapes or, kids like ants on a log. You can do that with other ingredients that don't have to be raisins, which are very concentrated in sugar. You almost have to think about ways that would be attractive to them. So almond butter, with celery sticks, and having what in your family are the favorite snacks almost replaced with a healthier version of them that they buy into and that they start to like. And then making sure that the foods you have, often savory foods have a ton of added sugars that we don't realize, like pasta sauces and ketchup and things like that, salad dressings even. So, making just a 2 or 3 ingredient vinaigrette and having it in the fridge for the whole family. Having a large salad be part of how everyone is eating. Yeah. And, people, that's one of the bases of what we do. And we add in maybe the proteins, in some families, one child is vegetarian, one child eats fish, whatever it is. So ways that it can work for different diets and different family members. But almost subtly or overtly, maybe, just changing how the family is eating. Yeah. And, that's how kids learn, if that, and of course, breakfast cereals are unfortunately a very big issue because breakfast cereals are highly processed and have a ton of sugar. So,
Absolutely.
Getting away from the habit that we've sort of grown up with is hard. It's hard for people to switch that out. So.
It's very hard because also the kids see the commercials on TV and it's like it feeds everything, right? And so they want to see, they want to have it. It looks like the fun, cool breakfast. I try all of these things. I try to do this with my kids, and at the end of the day, it's very, very difficult, But
it is hard. It is definitely hard, and it's hard to change a habit. It's difficult to know where do you start. So I totally get that. Chia pudding is one of my favorites, but
chia pudding. Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to try that one. I haven't tried that. I'm writing it down.
Because you can make it ahead, for the week, and everyone can have a little scoop. But it's rich in protein, rich in fiber. It has plant-based omega-3s. Use coconut milk, which is healthy, and they top it with berries or dark pieces of dark chocolate or whatever they want.
No, that's great. I'm going to try that one. What is your take then? Because I know you said you also use it in the book, so it can't be too bad. But the honey, because honey and
Yep.
popcorn are two things that are very like I wouldn't say controversial, but there's a lot of like mixed messages. Because popcorn,
Right.
obviously, it's corn, which can be
Right.
right. So what?
Which can be problematic. So with honey, my position on honey is that I use it only because it has other health benefits. And so I use it, but I use it in extreme moderation. And it's the one thing that, say I made one of the recipes in the book, and or say golden chai, and I wanted something. Usually I try to go with the sweetness of the cardamom and sweetness of the cinnamon. But if you want a little drop in a golden chai of honey, that's fine. I really do mean a drop, because the moment we start going from a drop to 2 tablespoons is when the whole problem begins with, overly using even a natural form of sugar. So I think that being mindful of that becomes really important. And I like to, because there's a lot about sort of the corn industry and all of that, I say to people, can we find other ways for those crunchy snacks that we like? A can of organic chickpeas, rinsed and dried, and with some fun spices. You can go in any direction of ethnic foods that you like, and crisped up in the oven, can be an actually nutritious snack that you make at home. And it doesn't take long, and you don't have to, I'm not saying you have to buy the chickpeas and pressure cook them. You can buy a couple of cans of organic chickpeas, rinse them out, and dry them and roast them. So it's thinking out of the box a little, but I totally get what you're saying, because children don't always buy into that. But maybe for us to model more of that behavior until it catches on, and of course, understanding it's not going to happen overnight.
So honey, then you're okay with in moderation.
In moderation, yeah.
Right, but does it not?
So very little, yeah. So
no, I was going to say, how does it affect your gut? Does it change the microbiome at all, or?
So honey, when honey, the reason I say little and in moderation is it's still broken down as sugar, right? So it, the moment that you start to, instead of that drop of honey, start adding it back in a big way, with the gut microbiome, those gut microbes want to be fed by fiber, those polyphenols from plants, lots of anti-inflammatory substances that we're eating, and antioxidant substances. The moment we, go on that fast food diet with the sugar and the French fries and adding, 3 tablespoons of honey to yogurt, is when we start to actually feed the bad microbes in the gut. And when they take over the good microbes, that's when you start to get inflammation in the gut. And that's when problems start for us. So it's about making sure that that gut environment and the microbes are healthy and fed the right foods.
We were talking about the gut bacteria for a second. You said this in the book a little bit, or I read a little bit about if you had like a schizophrenic person who had, their gut bacteria of the schizophrenic person, what would happen if you took the gut bacteria from a person who has schizophrenia and put it into somebody else? Would they not, or would they have schizophrenia?
So one of the studies that was actually pretty significant that was done was where they did a fecal transplant of the gut, elements of the gut bacteria from individuals who were diagnosed schizophrenia, and they put them into germ-free mice. So germ-free mice do not have they do not have bugs in their gut, and the mice developed those symptoms. So I think that was very significant, because what it told us, it really was being, but remember, this was in an animal study. But we also, with research, have to start somewhere. We can't always, look at someone's brain tissue and euthanize them for that reason. So that's why we start with animal models and work from there. So we do know that the gut is powerful, in that there's a lot of almost, for want of a better word, memory coded in the genes and in our DNA there.
Wow. And how about the role of the amygdala, the fight and flight response? Can we talk a little bit? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, the way that what we basically want to do is calm down our system. And that's where I feel like not only is it not only about medications, food is a big element, but another thing is mindfulness, breathing exercises, the power of a deep breath, using apps to calm ourselves down, to feel like we can transport ourselves by listening to a sound or looking at something, or doing, say, an alternate nose breathing or something, alternate nostril breathing. Even a mindfulness exercise, if you meditate, or you can help yourself get out of that state of panic. And it's really about working with ourselves to overcome the firing of the amygdala.
It's interesting how in the gut you know when you have an inflammation, you have a lot of symptoms, side effects if you have an inflamed gut. But when you have inflammation in the brain, it's not really obvious, right? So how do people know if, how do they become aware of what they need or don't need based on just if they don't know? You don't know what you don't know. So what's a good starting point for people besides, of course, getting your book?
Right. Absolutely. So I think that the way we want to think about it is some of the research in Alzheimer's has shown that neuroinflammation in the brain, so brain inflammation and neuroinflammation, is related to how we're eating in our lifestyle. Right. So what we can take away from that is that what I've seen is that individuals have an uptick of symptoms or new onset of symptoms when they have a disruption of the gut, which then loops back to that inflammation in the brain. So we know that we have to be eating differently, working on our stress, practicing mindfulness, doing all of it in a system. Our body is a system in order to lower that inflammation. So it's something we firstly want to be aware of, and then making sure we eat differently for that as well.
And if someone would come to your someone who would someone have inflammation if they had OCD and anxiety? I feel like those two are aren't they all somewhat connected? Anxiety,
absolutely.
Depression.
People could have touches of each of different things, and not necessarily fill in the check boxes of a category in DSM-5, which is what we use. But very often people have parts of different conditions and they just not feeling great.
Right. So if they come to your office and they have a little bit of a lot of OCD and a little bit of anxiety, is that inflammation in the gut? Is that inflammation in the brain? What would be a diagnosis to get someone started besides, of course, turmeric, which we know is like the secret power for everything?
Sure. I'm sorry, but I didn't understand. What is the diagnosis to get people started?
Yeah. What would be kind of like your first? What would be the kind of like action plan for someone like that? Besides, I said turmeric because we know how much you love turmeric.
Right. So I talk about pillars of mental health, and some of this really I developed as a way to bring these plans together really during COVID, because I knew that my book has the principles in them. And a good way for anyone to start would be to think about number one, what change can I make right now today? Am I eating enough vegetables? Could I have a serving of berries in the morning with my chia pudding? Could I think about what I'm eating instead of, say, a fried chicken sandwich from a takeout? Could I learn to do an oven roasted chicken, oven baked salmon, or if I'm plant-based, maybe I have a good non-GMO piece of organic tofu or tempeh or natto that I can prepare at home with some spices or however I'd like to have it, instead of that, say, fried chicken sandwich. So what can I do right now today that could up my nutrition game in terms of my health? Because I can tell you that if you make those changes, it's going to impact your mental health. That's where I have people start. It's got to be something that they feel they can grab onto and do. For some people, it's as simple as having enough water in a day, because hydration really affects our metabolism. It then affects the nutrients that we need for our brain. So even it could be as simple as that. But other people want to do a little bit more. So I have them start with the cornerstone of what they're not doing. And can they start to change some of that? And it really is a matrix of building up these different steps. But I also realize that you asked me about emotional immunity, and the best way that I can explain that is that, so we have our emotions. Could be more stress, could be our mood, being a little bit blue, seasonal affective disorder, in the winter is hard. But we have based a lot of this discussion, and my book is really based on the gut-brain axis. But 70% or more of our immune system is in the gut. That becomes really important to understand because we are also eating for our better immunity. So people don't realize that red bell peppers are one of the highest levels of vitamin C, more than citrus fruit. Adding those into a stir fry or smoothie, even however you want to have it, becomes important because it's improving your immunity, but it's also helping your emotional health because we understand that the gut-brain connection, how we eat, impacts those gut microbes. And so we want them to be thriving. And that's really where it loops back into impacting our emotion and also impacting our immunity.
Now, that's great. Is there certain things that we should, I guess not stay away from, we should incorporate if someone does have OCD? Or is that, I know we talked about, red pepper has a huge amount of vitamin C, but what should someone be looking for? What should they be kind of incorporate into their diet if they have OCD?
Sure. So they should, they should definitely be starting with those we've talked about the prebiotics, we've talked about the probiotics, starting with those. And then I think one of the things that I consider very powerful and have had very good effect within OCD has been being really cautious about where they find glutamates. Because glutamates can be in natural foods like mushrooms, Parmesan cheese, or even tomatoes. But monosodium glutamate and other glutamates can be found in other foods. And when you don't realize they're there, they actually worsen symptoms. So I often start with an OCD with people really wanting to be aware of the things that they want to be more careful about, because I find that it really drives symptoms, especially where it's hidden.
Right. I think a lot of the stuff, like we were talking earlier about the French fries and that are dipped in sugar or have sugar, a lot of things are hidden. That's the problem, right? We don't know what we're eating half the time.
And we don't know how we're eating. And that's why going towards, I was speaking to someone earlier, and she was just saying, everyone just needs to come off processed foods because we simply don't know what's going into them. And we also understand that that's hard. It's really hard for people to do that. But I feel that we have to move from, the standard American diet as much as we can edge ourselves in a healthier direction or push ourselves as much as we can do, that we should. And any one of those changes is going to be better than, the fast food French fries and kind of the junk foods that are a lot in our diet. And then, the things like trans fats have been associated with behavioral aggression in clinical studies. So, there's no denying these effects anymore. We know the evidence is there. It's how do we walk ourselves back from what we're eating to a healthier place.
Does it matter timing of food? Like at the beginning, we're talking about the keto. I don't think I kind of mentioned the intermittent fasting. Right. Do you intermittent? Is that something that you do? What do you think of that whole thing?
So, I think that there's more and more emerging evidence. Certainly there are positive benefits for physical health with intermittent fasting and fasting, mimicking diets and those different kinds. I think that it depends on the person because everyone's response is different. B, we knowing and learning more about the impacts on mental health. Some of my patients who have used it, and I always say only do that under the instruction of a doctor because you don't want to get yourself sick. You don't want to fast too many hours. You want to be discussing this with a physician. But people have noticed an improvement in brain fog, more clarity and focus. But I think that, where I'm at with it is I feel like the evidence for mental health is still coming out, but there's really good evidence for physical health, for sleep, for hormone balance, for circadian rhythm use and sort of, really helping us be in a better state of mind because of using fasting and intermittent fasting to our benefit. And, people start off with a 12-hour overnight fast and then have breakfast and then build up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just so curious because I know everybody who comes on here, every single person's intermittent fasting. I feel like I'm the last one to join the tribe. So I wanted to ask you, because if anybody knows, I would think it would be you. I would trust.
I think there's really a lot of good evidence for doing it, but doing it the right way. So,
Right.
The intervals for women are slightly different from men. I think that there's definitely a place for it, unlike, what I would consider to be more of the fads that are going. I think that there's a good amount of medical evidence and science behind what's being done on intermittent fasting. So what I just don't know enough of yet is where it will take us in terms of mental health.
Got it. I have one more question, I think, and that's basically, I'll let you off. I'll let you go. I know obviously it's about having the food source, but in terms of supplementing, what's your take on supplements? I mean, besides, of course, like I said, you obviously having the real food, but sometimes, like you said, for saffron, for example.
That's a great example of when it's needed. Vitamin D is another one, is another important one. Many people will supplement with omega-3 fatty acids, plus eat it in their diet. I think that magnesium can be super helpful for anxiety, but you can also get that through food. So my principle is, I try to work with people around their diet first. So changing into healthier habits, moving from that standard American diet. Why? Because I know that that's going to start to fill in nutritional gaps that they have because they've been eating a poor diet. But the reality is we don't lead a perfect life. We tend to have a lot of stress. We may not be sleeping well. We have, the sources of our food are not perfect. We don't all grow our own organic vegetables in our gardens and pluck them and eat them. So it's hard. It's hard for the average person to do this. So I think there's a place for supplements, and I think it much depends on what you're not getting in your diet, checking with your doctor. Maybe you need to get some blood tests or not. Or maybe that you're getting certain nutrients and not others. So it could well be that you need to supplement to fill in those gaps. But I wouldn't start there, because you really can't just like you can't exercise out of a bad diet, you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet. So if you're eating French fries from a fast food restaurant and their burgers every day, taking the best multivitamin and all those other supplements I mentioned is not going to do much. So people just need to understand that. So rather start to tweak your diet first and then fill in the gaps with supplements that you might need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, brother. This was a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It was great to talk to you.
You have such a great knowledge and fountain of information. And the book is called This Is Your Brain on Food. And I recommend it. Like I said, the recipes are I can't wait to make the salmon tonight and the sweet potatoes. The recipes are delicious. It looks delicious. It seems delicious. I haven't made one yet, but
people have liked them, and I think that the focus was really making them simple. Not because people can't cook, because you want to make it accessible. You want to, you don't want to start off with souffle. You just want to get some roasted salmon on the table, or roasted miso sweet potatoes or something like that.
No, and that's why I got to tell you, I get so many cookbooks that say come to me, or people who have recipes, and I never really make anything. But when I went through this, it was actually so there aren't very many ingredients, and it's kind of dummy proof. It's really hard to kind of screw it up. So that's for me. So that's why I'm oh my God, I'm going to make a whole meal tonight with this. So thank you. That's awesome. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I had just such great questions. Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure to have you. Where do people find you if they want to know more information on you and your book and all the amazing work that you're doing? Thank you. So you can follow me on social, which is at DrUmanaidoo, which is at Dr. Uma Naidoo. We're always putting out current research, new stuff that's coming out, and sharing really educational tips with people to feel better. And my website, which is you can subscribe to, umanaidoomd.com. The book is available through the website, but it's also available on all major booksellers, online, and your local bookstores. Well, congratulations. It's a really good book, and it's a good guide also. So like you said, you don't even have to just kind of read it, end to end. You can kind of go back to it and find what you need. And it's really, I really enjoyed it. So thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing that.
Habits and hustle, time to get it rolling. Stay up on the grind, don't stop, keep it going. Habits and hustle, from nothing into something. All out, hosted by Jennifer Cohen. Visionaries, tune in, you can get to know them. Be inspired, this is your moment. Excuses, we ain't having that. The Habits and Hustle podcast, powered by Habit Nest.